This is my 102nd video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is really a bit of a wander through some rolling stock. Mainly it will focus on my attempts to get very old triangle coaches to run without derailing on my modern track for push-pull duty on my shelf layout, my cosmetic improvements to those old triangle coaches, and my repainting and decaling of a couple of Hornby brake vans. Some other new rolling stock will also make an appearance: Airfix and Hornby autocoaches, recent production Bachmann tank wagons, and a couple of conflats with containers. And there'll be some running video of the stock on my main Hornby layout and on the shelf layout, still in progress. Well, isn't everything up to a point? I've been messing around with these old triangle coaches for a while, and they've featured in previous videos. I bought half a dozen of them on eBay with the intention of using them to approximate LMS push-pull trains for my shelf layout, since that runs from one terminus station to another and so is ideally suited for push-pull running, especially since it also has the automated shuttle controls which will run trains backward and forth without manual intervention. I did some work fixing these up to better approximate to something that the LMS might have run, applying gold lining and LMS decals. The old triangle coaches ran under shuttle control fine on my little test track, but that wasn't much of a test as it was just a straight track from one end to the other. When I came to run the old triangle coaches on my actual shelf layout, I immediately ran into problems as they couldn't get over the current production Pico set track points that I used on this layout without derailing. The wheels on the old triangle coaches were horribly badly gauged, only about 12 mm back to back, whereas they should be around 14.4. They were also difficult to re-gauge since they consisted of plastic wheels and axles with a metal axle going right through and then through holes in the bogie. To re-gauge the wheels, the plastic axle needed to be separated in the middle and then the wheels needed to be slid outward, which was hard to do as the metal axles were mostly rusted inside the plastic. The main initial problem was the guide rails on the Pico points, as shown here. If the wheels weren't far enough apart to pass outside those guide rails, passing between the guide rails and the main rails, then the coach would simply get kicked right off the track as it went over the point. I mucked around re-gauging the wheels by splitting the plastic axles and forcing the wheels outwards. By doing this, I could just about get the triangle coaches to go over the Pico points when those points were set straight, but I couldn't get the coaches to successfully go over a Pico point when it was set to turn. They derailed every time in that case. This triangle coach was in better shape than the others that I had. Its metal axles weren't rusted, and so I was able to push them right out, allowing me to completely remove the wheels and to re-gauge them in a more sophisticated way by actually putting spacers in the centre of the metal axles between the two sections of the plastic axle. The spacers were just made from pieces cut from the tubular plastic sticks of Q-tips. I did break the plastic axle at left here, so I had to repair it with CA. Generally, this made for more accurately and permanently re-gauged wheels. Here you can see a metal axle removed from this coach and its associated plastic wheels with their parts. When they were re-gauged to 14.4 mm, the wheels rubbed against the outside of the bogies and so they wouldn't turn freely. So I took them off again and polished down their outsides a bit with fine sanding paper. This tended to block the holes for the axles, so I cleaned those out with a knife. This resulted in wheels that were gauged properly and turned freely. However, the darned coach still derailed whenever I tried to take it over a Pico point set to turn. So it appeared that no matter what I did with those plastic triangle wheels, they weren't going to allow full operation with the Pico points. Now we'll digress a bit here. In the foreground in this picture is an Airfix autocoach that I bought and then put LMS decals on. Now these autocoaches were a GWR thing and then were used by BR. I know the LMS never ran something exactly like this. But since no one actually makes a ready-to-run LMS push-pull unit, I'm doing my best to approximate, and the LMS did run push-pull units. And these seemed another option. I bought both Airfix and Hornby autocoaches. In both cases in maroon BR livery, as it was easier to make this look somewhat credible for the LMS. Here's the Hornby example as it arrived. This is what it was, as I say, an ex-GWR autocoach in BR maroon livery. It came packed in the standard block of ice. Quite a nicely made model, and certainly this should run on modern track without problems. Two of the handrails for the passenger doors had fallen off in transit. I reattached those as best as I could. I used a little CA so they wouldn't fall off again. I did my best to remove the W's indicating the BR Western region, as these would be specifically BR. And then I applied press-fit decals for LMS lettering and the LMS insignia. The Hornby autocoach is at top here and the Airfix one is at the bottom. The Airfix one also came with a destination label for Didcot in white next to the passenger door. I removed this as Didcot would, of course, be GWR in the Big Four time. And we wander off in another direction. I bought these two Hornby LMS brake vans specifically with the intention of repainting them. I mostly prefer to run my LMS brake vans in grey, as I'm modelling LMS operations in the 1930s, and the LMS at first painted its brake vans grey, only introducing bauxite in 1937, very much towards the end of my period. I thought that these brake vans were supposed to have working rear lights. They certainly had red lenses on the back, but applying power didn't seem to produce any illumination. I took the roofs off the vans. They came off with just a little prying. Then the bodies were separated from the chassis by removing a single screw. It turned out that it wasn't surprising that the lamps didn't illuminate, as there was nothing at all inside to facilitate this. No bulbs, no pickups from the wheels, and no signs of wiring of any kind. Someone had added extra pieces of lead in the bottom of one of the vans, at right here. I masked the lenses of the lamps so that I could spray paint the bodies. I sprayed the bodies grey. My almost full can of light grey paint stopped spraying completely just as I started on the second body, and nothing I could do would get it to work again, thanks Rust-Oleum. Hence the body at left is sprayed with a darker grey. I didn't think the darker grey looked right, so I hand-painted that body with polyscale D&H grey. But I didn't try to hand-paint the inside areas. I reassembled both vans. Then I decalled them. I used Model Master decals for the running numbers and the 20-ton markings, and press-fix for the LMS lettering. I masked the lower area to protect the wheels and sprayed a coat of clear matte fixative to protect the decals and tone down the shine. And here are the two brake vans ready to go into service. I did end up replacing the missing coupling hook on the left one. Because of my masking, the lamps do still show red, even if they don't actually light up. I took the vans and tested their running on my little test track initially. They seemed quite free-running and correctly gauged, so hopefully they should operate fine. Now back to the balky old Triang coaches. I had several sets of these markets-turned metal wheels on hand. I'd bought them with the intention of using them with ratio coach kits that I had, but that didn't work as the ratio bogies were so wide that these wheels just fell out of them. The plastic wheels supplied in the ratio kits had much longer spiked ends on the outside, allowing them to run in the wide ratio bogies. So, having these on hand, I thought I would see if I could use these wheels with the Triang coaches, at least with the one where I was able to get the plastic wheels off fairly easily. I fitted the Markets wheels to that coach, and they actually worked reasonably well. The mounting was hardly ideal, as the Triang bogies just had holes right through them for the axles, and the Markets axles were designed with points to run in conical bearings. But they actually ran fairly okay in the Triang bogies and produced much better results than the plastic Triang wheels, finally enabling the coach to get through a pico point set to turn without derailing. I painted the discs of the Markets wheels with Tamiya matte black paint, as they looked rather silly when all bright silver. I thought that the wheels definitely looked better when painted black. Then I did my cosmetic workover of the body, picking out the gold lining with a gold Sharpie and applying press-fix LMS lettering decals. I picked up a pair of Bachmann LMS coach bogies with the idea that they might work with something like the Triang coaches where the original wheels were bad. The bogies on the Triang coaches were riveted on, which made swapping them out a bit difficult. Some of the Triang coaches had their roofs firmly glued on, but it was possible to remove the roofs on a couple of them, and this is what the attachment rivets for the bogies looked like from the inside. I drilled out the ends of those rivets just gently with a bit held between my fingers, as the rivets were quite soft and I didn't want to damage the plastic. I drilled just enough to remove the flange on the end of the rivet. Then I was able to pull off the bogie. I removed both bogies. The second one was a bit harder to get off than the first, as the rivet was sort of squashed. The Bachmann bogies, as at front, had their mounting holes set much lower down than the Triang bogies. The best I could come up with for mounting them to the Triang coach was to put in a small piece of foam board as a spacer. I was able to mount the Bachmann bogies so that they appeared to be able to turn okay. Unfortunately, this turned out to be basically a dead end, as the coach still kept derailing. I'm sure the Bachmann bogies would work fine with something to which they could be properly mounted, but my bodged mounting to the Triang coach didn't produce a result that could get over points without derailing. So I took the Bachmann bogies off again and set them aside for possible future use. I set about trying to remove the Triang wheels from the bogies for this coach so as to be able to fit Markets wheels. This was a devil of a job to do, as the metal axles were rusted solidly into the plastic parts, so the only way to get the plastic wheels off was to hack axles and wheels apart, which I did with a cutting disc in a rotary tool. Even with the axle cut completely away, the wheels still wouldn't come out, and I had to slice off one side of the wheels themselves to get them out of the bogie. When I did finally manage to hack out all 8 plastic wheels, I fitted Markets wheels and axles to these bogies. I bent the sides of the bogies in a bit by holding them with a leather gauntlet and heating them with a heat gun so as to secure the Markets axles. Here are the Bachmann bogies at right after removal, with the original rivets at front and the Triang bogies fitted with Markets wheels at the back. I was able to reattach the bogies reasonably securely using the original rivets. Then, as with the previously re-wheeled coach, I painted the discs of the wheels black and applied gold lining and LMS lettering. And this coach did now finally get over pico points set to turn without derailing. I wouldn't say that it will never derail, but it can get over the points without derailing if propelled or drawn slowly, which is better than it could do with any previous wheel and bogie arrangement. I wanted to make up a train for some running with the repainted Hornby brake vans. These were wagons that I'd bought and not yet unboxed, 5 recent production Bachmann tank wagons and mainline and replica conflats with containers. These recent Bachmann tank wagons are really nicely detailed models, quite a considerable improvement over some of the older tank wagon models with their crude strapping and limited detail. Look at the riveting and layering on the tanks of these, and the modelling of the tightening fixtures for the strapping. The markings are also quite complete and well done. Here are the 3 black tank wagons, quite similarly detailed to the silver ones. And here are the two container wagons. The container on the replica wagon is a bit smaller than the wagon itself, which makes the fit a bit awkward. I coupled these up behind my Hornby 008F on my main Hornby layout. I put brake vans at both front and back of this train, with the front brake van and a container wagon separating the first tank wagon from the engine, as was required. With another container wagon and the other brake van at the back, this train was symmetrical and so could have been coupled to an engine at either end. I was reasonably happy with how these brake vans turned out, and they'll probably get quite a bit of use, as every freight train needs at least one brake van. Here's the other brake van, the one where I hand-painted the body at the back of the train. So now let's go for some video of things running. Okay, let's just see if we can have a little look at things running, if they'll consent to run properly and not fall victim to Murphy's Law. We've got the train made up here. That's the Hornby 008F on the front, but it's got a tension lock coupling on the back, because it came to me with no coupling on the back, so I put a tension lock coupling on. And that's one of those Hornby brake vans that I fixed up. Then we've got a LMS container wagon, 5 Bachmann tank wagons, a replica container wagon, and the other brake van on the back. Now I don't have a handheld controller plugged into the line that's on, so I'm going to have to use the power on the actual Morley controller down there. Which means I'm going to have to sort of bend down. Am I turning the right power on? Yes, I am. Correct power. Get a real slowdown round that curve, and I haven't entirely figured out why that is. See how much faster he comes round? Well, the power feed is in this end. Turn him down just a little bit. He's going a bit faster than I really want there. Sorry. So I'm not on the handheld, and that's a bit too much. I'm trying to get him going slowly, but keep him going. And I'm not using the handheld. That's the furthest point from the power feed, and it does seem to suffer from pretty severe slowdown. So there's one brake van, and there's the other brake van. The whole point of that train is it's set up symmetrically, so you could hook the engine up to the other end, and it would still be valid. Well, there we go. Famous last words. I'm going to slow him down to a stop there. At least I would. Oh, well, I'd slow him down to a stop. Except that I was twiddling the wrong knob because I was trying to look at the camera. Okay. One knob feels much like another. Oh, I stopped him a little too early, but I'll pull the back end of him off there. I pulled the passenger train there part way out of the station by mistake there. Okay, well, I'm quite, the main point of this really was the brake vans, and I'm pretty happy with those. I'm quite happy with how they turned out on the whole. Okay, so now let's cross over. This is one advantage of having them in the same room, to the shelf layout. So on here I have one of these Triang coaches, the second one, which is the iffier one, to be honest. The first one was easier to change the wheels on and is probably better. This is the iffier of the two Triang coaches on which I changed the wheels. And I'm going to try and shuttle it. I'm going to try and run it under the shuttle. So In terms of the control panel, I've got that switch is turned on to enable power to the shuttle. This switch is turned to the shuttle side. And of the top three switches, the left and right ones are on. The middle one is not on. The reason the middle one is not on is because that controls power to that isolated area there, and I don't want that train to move, so I've got the power to that turned off. Okay, so that's set up to shuttle, and on the Morley controller I've got some power set for that line. So if I just flip the switch on the Morley controller from handheld to normal, which is declining to focus, if I switch that, as soon as I flip that switch to normal, the shuttle should start. Now, the shuttle will start its timing. That does not mean that the train will instantly move, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, so there you go, and there's the red light on the shuttle, which indicates that it's activated. Now, the question is, the big question is, will this train actually manage to get over the point without derailing? That was the critical problem. It's one thing propelling or drawing the coach along straight track, but trying to get it to go across a point that's set to turn without derailing, that was the really difficult thing. We're just waiting for the shuttle to trigger now, which unfortunately takes a while. It's set to take a while. And as soon as when the shuttle does trigger, it'll should start that train moving. That's a Hornby Ginty that we're using as an engine. Fairly straightforward engine. Not a cordless motor, because the shuttles don't like cordless motors. I did correspond with the vendor of these, and he said he didn't see any reason why they wouldn't like cordless motors, but they definitely don't seem to in my experience. There's the red light. I've got him going deliberately very slowly to sort of maximize the odds that he might actually go over the point. There's the point, and I believe he did in fact get over the point without derailing. So then he'll pull into that station and stop. Now, these shuttles that I have don't have any kind of thing where you can make the train stop gradually. I gather there are some shuttle control units that have an extra control in that allow you to make the train stop gently rather than suddenly when it gets into the isolated section at the station. But this one, the shuttle units I'm using are not that sophisticated. They just don't supply power to that isolated. Whoops, sorry, pushed the zoom too far. See, if you push this in just very, very gently, it will zoom slowly. But if you push it, there you go again. If you push it just a little too far, it zooms really fast. Yes, we got over the point, I think. So there you go. Tremendous amount of work I mucked around with on this coach trying to get it working, but it is sort of working now, or at least shuttling slowly.